Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. Today I'm going to talk to you about another great short saga from the Icelandic saga tradition, Króka-Refr saga, or the saga of Rev the Sly. Now, the translation of the saga's title that you'll usually find is the Saga of Rev the Sly. I would actually translate it using cognates and a little bit closer sense of the Old Norse as Crooked Rev Saga. But it doesn't really matter. He doesn't get that nickname until pretty late in his own saga. So just the Saga of Rev is fine. It's a pretty late saga, probably written down in the 1300s, somewhere late in the 1300s. But it's got a real classic story of a Coalbiter, Old Norse Kolbitr, made good. The Coalbiter is kind of the Old Norse couch potato. I'll get to that in a minute. And also Refr, in addition to being kind of this couch potato in his youth, he's a really unconventional saga hero. He's not Bruce Willis like the saga heroes tend to be, right? Somebody who's kind of an expected type of action hero, somebody who's willing to solve things with his fists, right? Fight everything out. Refr kind of avoids conflict and solves things with his head, and also kind of fights with his head. He's kind of a Batman character in that way. So Refr is a Coalbiter. What that means is pretty much what it sounds like. He sits next to the fire and, quote, bites the coals. He's somebody who doesn't go outside and work or plays. He just sits inside. You know, he's the guy who in today's world would just be sitting on his iPad on the couch all day. But in this world, you know, he's just sitting by the fire and not working or playing outside when all the other boys and men are. So his parents don't actually like him very much. And his parents are Stein and Thorgerðr. Now, Stein and Thorgerðr live next to a man of pretty rough temperament named Thorbjorn. Now, Thorbjorn is what the sagas call an ójafnaðarmaður, an unevenness man. This can be a good thing if it's said about a protagonist. It means he's kind of someone who doesn't think too little of himself. But it tends to be a bad thing when said about an antagonist. It means it's somebody who really thinks too much of himself, or it's an arrogant man. And in particular, Thorbjorn is known for having just killed men with very little provocation and for not paying compensation or otherwise making good for those kills. But he's also running over the boundary between his and Stein's property. He's letting his cattle browse across the creek that's supposed to divide their properties. Now, Stein is a fairly bold man himself, and so he goes to his neighbor Thorbjorn and complains about this and says, you know, I know that you've killed men for basically nothing, and so there's not much threatening of you that I can do to get you to not push your cattle or not have your cattle eating on my side of the river. But I will say this, when you go to court, you don't have any friends. All your neighbors say bad things about you. If you grant me this one request to control your cattle, I'll be the neighbor who actually speaks well of you in court. So I don't know if that counts as capitulating to a bully or kind of cleverly manipulating him, but at any rate, it actually works. Thorbjorn says, that's a reasonable point, and when you put it that way, I'm happy to keep my cattle on my side of the river. So for the rest of Stein's lifetime, Thorbjorn is actually a pretty good neighbor to them. But Stein catches some sickness, and as he's lying on his deathbed, he turns to his wife Thorgerðr and says, after I'm dead, you need to move, because Thorbjorn won't respect you the same way he respects me. He'll say, this property's owned by a woman, I can do whatever I want, and he's going to start sending his cattle over here the same as before. And sure enough, just after Stein dies, Thorbjorn just starts letting his cattle loose again. So Thorgerðr does try to sell the land, but she can't. Nobody wants to live next to Thorbjorn. So for 2 winters in a row, she has to endure slaughtering way more of her animals than she wants to because she just doesn't have the hay to feed them, because Thorbjorn's animals are just depleting their pastures so badly. But the spring after those 2 winters, Thorgerðr decides she's had enough. She hires a local man named Barði to watch over her sheep and try to keep Thorbjorn's from crossing over the river. So Bardi does a pretty good job of that, but this makes Thorbjorn, and more particularly his wife, Randveig, pretty upset, and Randveig starts really working on Thorbjorn. You know, I thought you cared about our property and our reputation among our neighbors, and that you would, you know, not allow just some little man from another farm to keep our cattle and sheep from getting their fill. By the way, cattle and sheep, livestock in general, are kind of one word. Typically in Old Norse, it's fe. So although they're probably often talking about sheep, they're sometimes talking about cows. So livestock. Anyway, so Thorbjorn goes over to where Bardi is at the moment, and he says, "Hey, why aren't you letting my livestock across the river here?" And Bardi says, "Well, it's my job to keep your livestock on your side, our livestock on our side." And Thorbjorn doesn't like that, so he kills him. Well, Thorgeir gets the news that the man she had hired to protect their property rights from Thorbjorn is dead. She's despondent, and she looks over and she sees her worthless son Refr playing his iPad by the fire, and she just lets loose on him with this whole rant about how unlucky she was the day she gave birth to him, how cursed her womb is to have produced him. I mean, it really makes me nostalgic for Thanksgiving at my mom's house. But at any rate, with this rant nearing its end, she says, "You know, Refr, I wish I had been so lucky as to have a daughter instead of a son, because if I'd had a daughter, I could have married her to a man who might have done something about this." Well, this is enough for Refr. He picks up a spear that belonged to his dad, and he goes heading over toward Thorbjorn's. And when he gets over to Thorbjorn's house, Thorbjorn says, "Who are you?" He's never seen this kid. He's always been playing Candy Crush inside. And Refr says, "Well, I'm Refr, I'm son of Stain." And Thorbjorn says, "Well, welcome, neighbor. What do you want?" And Refr says, "I want some compensation for our man Bardi that you killed." And Thorbjorn says, "Well, I'm willing to offer you some compensation." And Refr says, "What are you willing to offer?" And he hands him a whetstone and a dull knife. And he says that a dagr, that means dull or doughy knife, is befitting a dagr man. Now, dagr used of men is pretty insulting, right? It probably has some sexual connotations, being dull or unsharpened, or doughy, soft, right? But also could have just some straight up metaphorical connotations. You know, you're doughy and soft, not hard like a man should be. So Refr kills him. He manages to hide out for a while before Thorbjorn's men give up their search. And then he goes home to his mother Thorgeir, and she asks him what he's been out doing. He says, "Well, I killed Thorbjorn." Well, now she likes her son, but she says, "You know, it's going to be too hot for you around here." And she sends him to stay with her brother Gestr instead. Now, after a quick word from my sponsor, I'll come back for more of the story of Króka-Refr. Refr goes to live with his Uncle Gestr, and Uncle Gestr says, "What are you good at, Refr? What can you do? You know, what are you going to do on my farm? What kind of work are you going to pay your way with?" And Refr says, "Well, unfortunately, I'm not good at anything except, you know, Fortnite, or whatever he's been doing on his iPad. I just don't have any skills." And Gestr says, "No, I think you do. I think you have the makings of a great craftsman. I want you to make me a boat." To someone who's never made a boat. Refr says, "Well, I've never made a boat, Uncle Gestr." Gestr says, "No, make me a boat. There's a big Norwegian ship that wrecked on my property. You can use the timber and make me a boat." Refr says, "Well, I'll do it, but I don't know if it'll be any good, so I want you to build me a shed that I can do this work in so that nobody will see me or see this boat if it turns out to be really bad," right? He's kind of embarrassed. It's actually pretty human emotion for these sagas. So Gestr agrees. He builds him a shed, and Refr goes in and makes a ship, and it turns out to be the biggest and most excellent ship ever seen in Iceland. Right? He's just intuitively a master shipbuilder. It's improbable, but kind of fun and kind of a different improbable skill than the Saga heroes often have. But one day, I think it's after Refr has made this first ship, he's working on another boat, because now he's a well-known boat crafter. There's a local man named Gelir, who is said to be mjok gleði. He's very much at joy at games. He's just a fun-loving guy. And he comes by where Refr is working, and he says, hey, we're having some sports later. We're all getting together, everybody in the area. Why don't you join up? And Refr says, no thanks, I got work to do, man. But Geller says, no, come on, man, do it. This is so much like in high school, right, where you're trying to do, I don't know, homework in a park, and somebody's trying to get you to join their flag football team because they need one more person, and they start really hassling you about it. And Refr says, no. Geller says, well, you're going to have to wrestle me to get out of it. Refr doesn't want to do that, but Geller tackles him, and they start wrestling. And Refr's actually pretty good at it, which frustrates Geller. So as Geller's about to ride away, he picks up his spear, and he doesn't spear Refr, but he thwacks him with the blunt end of it on the back of his shoulders, and then that bounces off his shoulders and hits the back of his head too. So now Geller runs off whooping and hollering, and he tells all his friends that he hit Refr twice with a weapon, and Refr did not avenge the injuries. Now, this is a big deal in Norse culture and Norse law. Men are supposed to avenge injuries with weapons, even something as seemingly simple as this. Remember, this is a big plot point in the story of Thorstein's stickbeat, which I went over 3 years ago when I was talking about drengskap, or Norse manliness. Well, Refr isn't happy about this, and the next time that Geller comes by his workstation, Refr runs out and kills him with an adze, right, like a pickaxe. And then he goes home, and Uncle Gester says, Refr, you seem more cheerful than you usually do. Something going on? And Refr says, in a poem, of course, that he has repaid Geller's 2 blows with 1, and that the raven now has something nice to eat. Well, Gester's pretty happy about that. He says, whew, I was real worried. Everybody was starting to talk about you being kind of a coward since you hadn't avenged these insults that Geller was, these injuries that Geller was bragging about giving you. But now, once again, just like when you left home the first time, I'm afraid it's going to be too hot for you here in this district, because Geller was from a powerful family in the area. So why don't you take one of these boats you've crafted and go to Greenland? And so Refr does that. He goes to Greenland, settles in a nice fjord where he marries Helga, sets up a nice home on one end of a peninsula, and on the other end of the peninsula, there is a guy named Thorgils, who is another one of these, man, right, kind of a bully. Well, Refr has a happy marriage, has a couple sons with his wife. They don't really come into the story. But he is the subject of rumor in Greenland, just as he was in Iceland. People rumor that he was banished from Iceland for something shameful. There's a lot of hints that maybe he is particularly womanly, effeminate, right? Arger, which has fairly strong connotations of implying that a man is homosexual. And it doesn't help things that Refr goes about unarmed. He doesn't carry a weapon like other men do. In fact, of course, he uses things like pickaxes when he's working on his boats, but he locks them up in a tool shed and goes home without a weapon. So one day he's going home from working all day. Apparently his workshop and his house are a fair distance from each other. He's walking home in the evening, and he comes across a polar bear. Now, he doesn't have any weapons, so he goes back to his shed to get a pickaxe, but when he comes back to where the bear is, he finds out that the 4 sons of Thorgils, his aggressive neighbor, have already killed the bear. Now, Refr goes home not thinking much of it, but Thorgils' sons go home to Thorgils, and Thorgils says, well, how was the fishing today, boys? And they say, well, we didn't catch any fish, we caught a polar bear. And he says, it's good fishing. But then the boys tell him about how their neighbor Refr had encountered the polar bear before them and had, quote, fled from it. Right? Of course, they're going to spin this as being cowardice on Refr's part. And they say even that his footprints in the snow were full of piss. He was just that scared as he fled the bear. Speaking of which, Old Norse for piss is piss, so I'm barely making this more profane than it is in the original. So Thorgil says, haha, yeah, that sounds like Refr. We've all heard the rumors about him. Everybody calls him Refr in Ragi, with Rager, that's another version of that adjective Arger, with just metathesis. So Refr, the unmanly, the effeminate, cowardly. And all of these rumors start going around about how effeminate Refr is, how Rager or Arger he is. Thorgils even spreads the oddly specific rumor that you see in some sagas that Refr is, quote, used as a woman every 9th night. Remember, this is also said of Flosi in Njál's saga, when Skarphedin is trying to provoke him into a fight. So Refr, of course, tries to kind of live with these rumors, but eventually his father-in-law approaches him and says, Refr, I just don't know about this man. You know, these rumors are so bad. I'd like to know what you're going to do about this. He says, and I'll give you the original here because it's an interesting quote. Of mjok þykir mer þú sanna orð vondra manna, þú lætur þá kyrrt sitja. It seems to me that you do too much to verify the words of bad men when you leave them to sit talking in peace. Well, Refr listens to this, and the first thing he does is make arrangements to sell his property in Greenland to somebody else. Now this looks like he's about to actually prove that he's a coward and just leave again. But once he's made arrangements to sell his property, he goes to Thorgils' place. Thorgils is in the kitchen smoking some meat or something and can't see through the smoke who's at the door, and he says, who's there? And Refr says, it's me, Refr. And Thorgils says, well, welcome, neighbor. Well, what do you want? Now Refr says, I want you to give me some compensation for the slander that you're spreading about me. And Thorgils says, well, what slander? And Refr says, well, all these innuendos about how effeminate I am and whatnot. And Thorgils says, oh, that, well, I don't think that's slander. I think that's just the truth. And so Refr splits his head with his spear. This is one of those things that the Norse call a hogspjot, chop spear. It's a spear, kind of like a halberd that has a chopping blade on it too. Kind of a mix axe spear. And Revr's is particularly said to be kind of sawed off, so it's got a shorter shaft. It's a carbine version of a spear. Anyway, now Refr goes down to the pier where Thorgils' sons launch their boats from. And when the boys come home from fishing, boys, I mean they're young men, he kills them too. Then he moves with his wife and kids and father-in-law to a whole different fjord and lives in peace for a little while. Now, Thorgils' son-in-law, Gunnar, conducts a big search for Refr, but can't find him. Revr's in a hidden side fjord a good ways away. And so eventually he just decides that Refr must have died in a shipwreck when he sailed away, because they know he sailed somewhere, and he just kind of gives up on it. But sometime later, Revr's friend and trading partner, Bardi from Norway, is visiting. And he asks Gunnar about what happened with this whole Refr deal, and Gunnar tells him about it and says, you know, we all just think he died in a shipwreck or something. But Bardi says, no, Refr is too lucky of a man to have died in a shipwreck. Now remember that the Norse consider luck to be kind of a characteristic of a person, right? You are lucky or unlucky. Being unlucky might simply mean that you're ugly, right? And so people assume that you're unlucky about other things too. But you're kind of generally considered to be either lucky about everything or unlucky about everything. Refr is considered lucky, so too lucky to have died in a shipwreck. I think in our society we rarely think about people as being that lucky consistently. Maybe one of the few examples of something similar is when Jesse says of Walter White in Breaking Bad, like season 5, he says, you don't understand, he's luckier than you. That's the closest thing I can think of to this Norse idea that somebody's just inherently lucky in everything, or unlucky in everything. And Revr's one of these people who's lucky in everything. He's what the Norse call a gavumaður, a man of luck. There's also, of course, the opposite, gavumaður, a man of unluck. So anyways, he's too lucky of a man. So they go searching harder, and they find the side fjord where Refr has been living, and they find that Refr has built himself a fortress. They try to burn down this wooden fortress, but every time they do, water comes out of the walls of the fortress and puts out their fires. So they think it's magic. They go back home, and Ph.D. sails back to Norway with many fine goods from Greenland for trade. And he goes to the court of the king, King Harald Hardruler, Haraldur Harðrodi, famously the king who died in 1066 in England as one of the three claimants to the English throne. But anyway, this is before that. This seems to be taking place in the 1040s or 1050s. And anyway, Ph.D., who's a friend of the king, presents him with some wonderful gifts from Greenland. He presents him with a walrus skull inlaid with gold. Presents him with, I don't remember if it's a living polar bear or a polar bear skin. Presents him with a fine walrus tooth ivory Nevatavl board, a board for playing the Norse board game. By the way, it also says that it's good for both the old game, presumably Nevatavl, and the new game, presumably chess. So that's kind of fun. And the king says, these are fine gifts. Who are they from? And Ph.D. says, oh, they're from a man named Gunnar out in Greenland. And the king says, well, what does he want in exchange for these gifts, right? He wants something. And Ph.D. says, oh, he just wants your friendship, my lord. The king says, no, these gifts are too fine. What does he really want? Ph.D. says, well, in addition to your friendship, my lord, he might want some help killing a fox. Now, Old Norse Refr means fox. So this is a simple pun. By the way, those backpacks that you see all over campus, Fjällräven, in Swedish, that is the mountain fox. Räv, pronounced almost the same as the Old Norse root rev, means fox. So that's a fun little note. So the king says, oh, help killing a fox. This wouldn't be the same fox I heard about out in Greenland that killed 5 men over an insult and really proved what a dranger he was. Now, the king is impressed. The king's heard good rumors about Refr. Ph.D. says, yeah, it might be the same fox. And he tells him about the fortress with the magical water that puts out flames that are supposed to burn it down. Anyway, the king says, well, I think that this isn't magic, but that there's pipes running through the walls that are putting the fires out. So dig under the walls, cut the pipes, and you'll be able to burn that fortress down. But I warn you, Ph.D., you will probably not come home if you try to fight Refr. And of course, in typical Saga fashion, every prophecy and prediction is correct, but no one that the prophecies or predictions are about ever thinks they are. So Ph.D. says, oh, you'll prophesy better about other things, my lord. And he returns to Greenland with this intelligence. So now Ph.D. and Gunnar go on, I think, 2 ships, leading some men to Revr's fortress. They cut the pipes under the walls, they start burning it, and then they say Refr up on the walls, and they say, haha, Refr, your fortress is doomed. And Refr says, ha, ho, that's not news. And say, yeah, what are you going to do about it, huh? And well, Refr is going to do something about it. One of the walls of his fortress falls down, killing 4 of the men in the party of his enemies. And then he rolls out on a ship with wheels with all of his family, and they roll down to the sea. To me, it's one of the funnier scenes in the saga, whether it's intended to be funny or not. Just this ludicrous, like, Batman machine. So Revr's now sailing away. Ph.D. jumps in his own ship, sails after, catches up to him. Right, in naval combat at the time, you have to kind of catch up and fight more or less as you would on land. The ships next to each other. But Refr throws a spear, kills Ph.D. So the king was correct. And Refr escapes. His sons and he cut the rigging on the other ship so it can't follow them. He escapes, and now he goes straight to Norway. Specifically to the old capital of Norway, Nidaros, or Trondheim. And now he disguises himself, going under the name Narvi and using a big fake old man's white beard. So as Narvi, he disguises himself as a trader or merchant in Greenlandic wares, the same kind of stuff that Ph.D. had brought from Greenland, furs and such from the exotic animals out there. But one day while he's out selling his wares, his wife Helga, back at home, is accosted by one of the king's premier bodyguards, a man named Grani, who goes by the nickname Sheath Grani. It'll come up in a minute. Sheath Grani, to be frank, tries to rape Helga. But Uh, Refr hears his wife's struggle inside the house, goes inside, finds Sheath Grani trying to rape his wife, and Grani gets off of her when he sees Refr, and he runs outside. Refr chases after him, gets him backed up against a wall, and Grani says, "Hey, man, what are you going to do about it? I am, best friends with the king. I'm one of his highest appointed men. You kill me and the king's going to come after you." Refr just says, "Well, I don't care," and he kills him. But realizing that in this society what makes a killing murder isn't whether it's unjustified or not, but whether it is secret or not, Refr decides he's got to confess this one way or another, even if obliquely. And he goes to the king's hall where the king's having a meeting, and he just declares in this rambling, honestly kind of idiotically punny paragraph, this whole thing about how he's had a soup understanding with Swordhouse Grani, and he wild pigged him against a wall after he nest-balled him on. It's a lot more than that, but not all the puns work in English. So the king finishes his meeting. Refr leaves after pronouncing this weird mash of words. And then he says, "Who was that? Who's that guy who said all that weird stuff?" Somebody says, "Oh, who knows? It's that Narvi guy from Greenland, I guess. Probably just nonsense." The king says, "No, that wasn't nonsense." Kings are always portrayed as being kind of extra wise. Just like the king figured out Refr's fortress, he also can figure out these stupid puns. And he says, "I think when he says he fought Swordhouse Grani, well, a swordhouse is a sheath. So that Sheath Grani, my bodyguard, when he nest-balled him on, a nest ball's an egg, so he egged him on." That pun actually does work in both Old Norse and English. Anyway, he figures out that this soup of words that Refr, aka Narvi, spilled out in him means that Refr has killed his man Narvi. Well, Refr now flees to Denmark. To make a long story short, because to me this saga just loses gas at the end like so many of them do. The king of Norway sends some men to Denmark to find Refr. They do find him, but now he's under a different disguise, under a different name. He's calling himself Sigtrygr now. Sigtrygr waylays them, kills, I think, one of them, and then tells him to go back to the king of Norway with the news that he better not try to send more men to pursue a friend of the king of Denmark, which he is because he's brought Greenlandic goods to Denmark, which are otherwise not available there since Norway has a monopoly on Greenlandic trade. This is for the king of Norway not to send more men into the sovereign state of Denmark after a friend of the king of Denmark. And that's more or less how the saga of Refr ends, minus your kind of typical postscript where he gets very Christian pious and makes a pilgrimage to Rome and actually dies of sickness on his way back from his pilgrimage to Rome, and I think is buried in a monastery in France, which one is not specified. So there you go, short saga with the highlights kind of reviewed here. I think it's kind of fun, kind of different, right? Like I said, not your stereotypical saga hero, but a character with some more modern traits in the sense of what we would look for maybe in the more complex characters of TV shows today. Interesting guy, and underappreciated saga. Well, I hope that's been of some interest to you, or of some information to you. I hope that you're staying healthy amid all this coronavirus panic right now in April 2020 when I'm recording this. And from beautiful Colorado, let me wish you all the best. Now let me make a quick PSA here. I know many people are, and I'm flattered that many people are interested in coming to the University of Colorado to study with me or take my classes. But remember, as discussed in several videos, I am leaving the Nordic program at the end of spring 2020, so I will no longer be teaching classes like Norse mythology, Icelandic sagas at CU. If those classes continue to be taught at CU, they will be taught by somebody else. I will no longer have any association with the Nordic program. I will still be at the University of Colorado in an unpaid position as resident scholar. And hopefully, during this period, I'll have more time to make these videos, which of course reach more people than any classroom ever will. Work on my upcoming translations, such as the Prose Edda, and work on my class in Norse mythology for the great courses. But Please don't come here thinking that I run some Hogwarts for Old Norse. I don't, and you're not going to find that anywhere, actually. There really aren't any good jobs teaching this stuff, and I need to try to make a living. And actually, given the lack of rewards in teaching this stuff in a conventional way in classrooms, I need to take the time away from the classroom to work on these projects that really reach the people that are interested in this stuff, the videos, the books, and now great courses. All right. Well, as always, for beautiful Colorado, let me wish you all the best and good health and the best to you and yours during this whole coronavirus situation in April 2020. All the best.